Thanks, Ben. Ben, you could pull up the next slide just because we'll interact with it a little bit. So this is a purpose statement of a university. Let me just read it. It says, "To the glory of God and to the preservation of the Republic, an institute of higher learning dedicated to the search for the dissemination of truth, to freedom of thought and discussion, to intelligent, unbiased analysis of the forces that shape the past and will mold the future, to the development of manhood and womanhood, for Christian service and for loyal citizenship." Does anyone want to take a wild guess which university this is?
UCLA.
UCLA, okay, good guess. Any other guess?
Biola.
Biola, okay, that's a good guess too, yeah, I could guess Biola too. So I'm going to put a pin on that and come back to it in a second. So I know that, about a week and a half ago, we all had spring break. Some of us went back home to see our family and friends. And I feel like this always happens, but have any of you been asked or just been told by people, friends that you haven't seen for a long time, it's like, wow, you've really changed since I last saw you. Did anyone get that at all? Okay, some people. When I get that, I ask myself, did I really change? I didn't feel that different. But let me tell you that when I was in high school, there's one thing I was known for, and that was that I was a huge pro wrestling fan and one of the few Asian guys on the wrestling team. Now, if any of you were involved in sports in high school, you know how much dedication is needed. Yes, that's a picture of me. I weighed 103 pounds at that time. Because, yes, that's another story. But the reason why I was 103 pounds is your weight determines where you compete and also your spot on the team. And so that's me, a wrestler at 103 pounds. And then I went to UCLA. Or better yet, I went to the UCLA dining hall. And I was talking to Derek the other day, and he's like, you know what? I heard that UCLA has the best food in the entire country. And you know what, Derek? You're not wrong. That's what they had there. And every Monday, they served us sushi. And let me just list some of the desserts that they had. There's cheesecake and churros and strawberry cheesecake frozen yogurt, white chocolate almond frozen yogurt. And that's not counting, the burgers and pizza. And there's even this one place that they called Feast at Reaver. It is an Asian-themed place. And show the next, yes. So this is actually what they serve. This is on their website of what they serve. So it's ramen, Vietnamese sandwiches, all-you-can-drink Vietnamese coffee, chicken vindaloo, lamb burger, green tea, ice cream, all day, every day. And this was their slogan. This is their slogan. Don't just eat, feast. And feast I did, all day, every day. I ate, I drank, and I was merry, and I totally bought into that culture. Don't just eat, feast. And I'll remember, no, spoiler alert. Okay, so what happened was me and my best friend Will at that time, our freshman year, we saw what the main entree was, like, no way. Okay, go to the next slide. Korean barbecue ribs. They were serving it there, and we're like, dude, don't they serve this at like $10 a plate at like Koreatown? They're like, yes. And so we got a plate, and we got another plate, and we got another plate. And then we noticed that things were starting to go viral, that more people were starting to take these plates. We're like, dude, I'm full. It's like, no, but we can't stop eating right now. We don't know when we're going to get another opportunity like this. And so we feasted. And let me just say that I know that some people come worried into college about the freshman 15. I think I was worried that I was reaching the freshman 50. So if you show the next picture, so here's me, again, 103 pounds, and then here's me and Will. I came to UCLA as a 103-pound high school wrestler and left a sumo wrestler. So I never intended it to happen, and it's not like things change overnight. It was a gradual process. I couldn't even tell in the mirror, but when friends saw me, like, Tim, you've changed a lot. It's like, the camera adds a couple of pounds. Like, so how many cameras do you have on you? The UCLA dining hall left a lasting impression on me, and I carry it to this day. And it's all because I ate, I drank, and I bought into their culture. Don't just eat, feast. And I'm not sure we realize how drastically things can be changed, how drastically we can be changed, how we can be influenced over time. And it may not be noticeable to us, but then when we compare it to how we used to be, it just leaves you wondering, what happened? So going back to that purpose statement that I showed you, the university that had this was actually USC. Go to the next slide. University of Southern California. So at their entrance, established here July 29, 1879, and it just leaves you wondering, what changed? When it was all about the glory of God and man and womanhood to be Christian servants, what changed? So tonight we're going to focus on this topic, living a godly life in a secular culture. And I think this is a particularly relevant issue for us because out of every 10 Christians who attend college, 7 of them end up leaving the church within a year. And as followers of God, we need to be aware of how the campus influences us. Where we are, it influences us. And I want to take a look at the book of Daniel and see how that relates to this situation and what it has to say. And so let me give us some cultural context before we dive into Scripture. In this passage we're about to look at, God's chosen people, the Israelites, have been disobedient to God, and he allows the Babylonian Empire to conquer them, take them out of their homeland and into captivity in Babylon. And at this time, Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Babylonian Empire. He's renowned as a patron of the cities and a spectacular builder. He's built all Babylon's major cities on a lavish scale. And he's even famous for creating the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Babylon was the world center of cultural progress and military strength, and it was praised for its infrastructure of irrigation and canals. And if there were 3 words that could best describe this empire, it would be beauty, strength, and sophistication. And with that, let's jump into Scripture. So this is from Daniel 1 from the NIV. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. So let me just summarize what just happens here. So the most qualified young individuals are away from home. They're given a meal plan, and for the next few years, they're to be educated and trained, being taught in language and humanities, and at the end, they would land some of the most prestigious jobs that are offered. Does any of this sound familiar to you at all? Can anyone relate to this experience of being away from home, being educated, and hoping to get a job at the end of it? Anyone? Sounds like a college experience, right? And it seems like a pretty sweet deal. But what's the catch? And I want us to go on to verse 6. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." So now that they have their meal plan and there's this food presented to them, Daniel's like, "Hey, whoa guys, wait a second. And when I first read the story, I'm just like, dude, what's going on? It's free food. What's the big deal? It's just food. It's not like they're hurting anyone. Why are you making such a big deal about it? And, if he's looking around, everyone's doing it. And so it's like, why is Daniel making a big deal? And so I did a little bit more research about the food laws and what's going on here. So God's law, including the food laws, were given as a gift to his people, the Israelites. At this time, these laws were his directions on what it meant to be in right relationship with one another and a right relationship with God. It was also an important part of their identity so that they could be distinct as the people of God, as a way to differentiate themselves from the culture of other nations. In their lifestyle, in their way of life, how they did things, what were their priorities, and even what they ate, people would be able to identify them as the people of God. And this passage doesn't say specifically what's given, but it's safe to assume that this food was either not kosher or food that was probably sacrificed to idols. And this is where Daniel draws the line, because he doesn't want to defile himself. He doesn't want to make himself unclean by Jewish cleanliness laws. Daniel has a choice to follow God's given laws that pertains to food, or to choose to go with the flow, do what everyone else is doing, and eat and drink and buy into their culture, which would thus defile himself and break God's laws. And he's about to protest, and then there's this official who pipes up, and he's like, you don't understand. This is how we succeed. If you are not as good as everyone else and you don't do this, I'm going to die and be killed for this. And I could just imagine what's going on for this official. I think that he actually serves as a voice of reason in the situation. He likes Daniel. He expresses favor and sympathy towards him, but he's afraid because his life is at stake. And fundamentally, it makes sense in his eyes. The Babylonians have strong men in their military. They have intelligent men developing their culture and technology. And a strong part of their culture is the food that they eat. You can't succeed in Babylon if you don't eat this food. And I think in the same way, we can find ourselves in Daniel's shoes. When the culture that we're in can sway us in a particular way, it can be extremely easy to just buy in, eat and drink what's put in front of you without a second thought, especially when everyone else is doing it. But like Daniel, we are always given a choice, and God offers us a better way. Daniel knew when to draw the line, but do we know when to draw the line? Are we aware of the culture around us as to know when to draw the line? Do we even know what the culture of college is, or much less the culture of Cal State Fullerton? Even though colleges state that their purpose is to be institutes of higher education and learning, when you think about it, the culture that's promoted isn't actually about that. And yes, we do learn, we do get educated, we do get trained, and we do end up with a job, but the culture that's being promoted isn't about education, it's actually about competition. Think about it. The whole idea of a bell curve is that you're competing with all the other students for a limited number of A's and B's. It's less about how much you learn and know, and more about how you compare to other people, how much more you know more than they do, how much better you test than they do. That your grades, your value, your worth is always in comparison to other people. And that's just the college culture. Me and Ben have spent extensive times at other campuses, and there's little nuances, little differences, and each has their own culture, their own besetting sins, their own idols, particular to that college. What are the things that just about everyone does, things that's much easier to rely on, put your faith in, trust in, than it is trusting in God? And so if anyone wants to take a guess for USC, a lot of people might say, oh, it's football. They're all about football culture. And yes, football is a huge idol there. But across the board, one of the besetting sins and idols of that culture is power and ambition. I think especially ambition, because everyone you talk to is almost talking about the resume. It's like, hey, did you know that I'm the pianist for the final season of Glee? Or hey, have you heard about my new startup? Or hey, have you heard about how much my investments are doing? It's kind of crazy, but those are normal conversations that you have with USC students. At UCLA, it's academic success. It was not uncommon for me to see people in study groups during finals week have another student come in, just kind of get an assessment of, okay, how smart is everyone here? How much does everyone know? And just leave once they know that they're smarter than everyone else. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. And at Chapman University, maybe you saw some of the students who came to join us for the dating seminar, but when you walk on that campus, you look at what everyone else is wearing, and then you look at yourself and you're like, wow, they really care about image here. Every campus has their besetting sins and idols. And so I want to ask us, what are the besetting sins and idols of Cal State Fullerton? Turn into twos right now and discuss that. What are the things that people just do, that they rely on, that they trust on more than God, that this is the way that we succeed. This is part of our culture. So turn into twos and discuss that. What are the besetting sins and idols of Cal State Fullerton? All right. I'll bring us back together. Bring us back together. All right. So, any brave souls out there? Yes. What do you think is one of the?
I'd say indifference towards each other.
Okay.
Indifference to the fact that like we were privileged to go to school.
Okay, indifference. Yeah, kind of like a more self-motivated or kind of.
No, indifference as in like one thing I noticed on campus is no one really smiles and like acknowledges one another.
Okay.
No, but seriously, I know that I do that. Like I come on campus even if I'm in a good mood, like I don't look anybody in the eye,
Mm-hmm.
and no one looks me in the eye.
Okay.
And then also because like it's a commuter school, it's like everyone's indifferent to each other. It's like this is literally like I don't care about anyone here except myself.
Okay, kind of like you're in your own little world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's in their own little world.
Okay. Yes.
There's a lot of like loneliness. People care to make friends rather than like seek out to God.
Okay.
Because it's a commuter school kind of, and people are like, there's no one here, and like, yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, go Sarah then.
I feel like drugs is a big one.
Okay.
Like I'm trying to get rid of it, but
Yeah.
people still do it. And then our spring conference is Wiz Khalifa and Tyga. We promote drugs. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's not.
Oh, did you have
I
something?
notice a lot with our school is the way the classes are set up. It's very much like getting ahead.
Mhm.
So we don't like appreciate our education, but rather like the test scores we can get, so we can just like get those prereqs out of the way.
Okay.
We're not understanding like how gifted and blessed we are.
Okay. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Ego centers
Okay.
are a big one, especially in humanities and research.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Any last ones? Yeah. Awesome.
I feel like in both my colleges, for sure, like if you have an internship, you're seen as
Okay.
like higher
Yes.
above everyone else. For sure.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I also say like the shorter you're here, like the better you are, like the longer you're here.
Okay.
If you're past 5 years, like you are good.
A loser. Right.
Um,
Nothing. Okay. I love it. So one thing that I love, one of the things that I love here is everyone being able to take a step back and see it's like, what are the besetting sins? What are the idols of this campus? So for me and Ben, we've only been here for a couple of years. We've been at different college campuses, and I remember asking him this question. We just looked at each other straight, and we're like, what's the besetting sin of Cal State Fullerton? And both of us said in sync, it's like, busyness. It's as if we have a meter of available time and energy, and we have a need to use it up so that it's as close to zero as possible. It's the limit as it's approaching zero of our time and energy. We here at Cal State Fullerton want a full life, a full college career, and that I need to maximize my time in college, maximize my summer, use that time and energy efficiently to make the most of my college experience. The grades, resume, internship, job, research, what have you, that I need to do this. I need to provide for myself because if I don't, who will? And I think it's extremely important for us to take a step back and evaluate our culture, our environment, what everyone else is doing, and just ask, what does it look like to follow God in the midst of this? And I think that we can learn from Daniel. So continuing on with our scripture, verse 11. Daniel then says to the guard, whom the chief official has appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servant for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants accordingly with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. Here are three things that I see in Daniel in this reaction. The first is this. Daniel knows the godly way. Daniel knows the godly way. The second one is this. Daniel takes a risk and chooses the godly way. And I know those might sound like the same thing, but they're different. There's a difference between knowing and also choosing into it. Against all the data and logic, against popular opinion, he chooses a better way. And the last thing is, Daniel does this in a community of friends. Daniel chooses the godly way because growing up, Daniel and his friends would have grown up learning about the first 5 books of the Bible, the law, forward and backwards. Daniel knows what God intended through the law, and he's choosing it despite what all these other Israelite men are doing around him. And I think for us, the way that it relates to us is that the single most important thing that we can do is be grounded in the Word. Be grounded in truth by constantly reading the Bible. Because if we do not, our opinions, our lifestyles, our choices will all be influenced by the culture around us, by popular opinion, by other people, by our own feelings and inclinations, and not on truth. The second point that I brought up is that Daniel takes a risk and chooses the godly way. And I think when it comes to the college environment and academics, there are 2 ways that we can give into culture rather than living a godly life. So divided up into 2 groups. So the first group, especially around this time of the year, tend to be majority seniors who have a strong case of what is called senioritis. You see what everyone else is doing, like, we're almost done, I have this job ready, I'm done with college. And maybe you're a sophomore and like, I have senioritis already. And maybe you're like, I've had senioritis since I was a senior in high school. And you know what? That's not senioritis, that's just laziness. But that's what the culture is telling us to do. That's like, it's okay to shirk your responsibilities. But what if we take a look at what God calls us to? He calls us to be good stewards of what's been given to us. For those who have been given much, much is expected. And do you realize that if you're in college, you are in the top 1% of the world in terms of your privilege? And I feel like this is one piece of truth that I want us to hold on to when it's so easy to succumb to laziness. So this is from Colossians 3:23 and 24. The Apostle Paul writes, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if working for the Lord, not for men. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you're serving." So even though we find our central identity as children of God, our present roles right now is students. Students with the gift and privilege of an education. And what do we do as students? We study. We read. We write papers. We take tests. But do we do it with all our heart? Can we actually see how our studies can be an act of worship, an act of service to Jesus? So what does it look like for you to steward this well? What does it look like to consider everything that you do, including your studies, as an act of worship to the Lord? One of my friends, she practiced this as much as she could. Before she cracked open a book, before she worked on a paper, she would take 5 to 10 minutes and just pray. And this is her opening line. Jesus, may this studying that I'm about to do be an act of worship to you. And with that, she entered into her act of worship and did her studying as if she was doing it for God. Now the second group, so I think there's the first group that struggles with laziness and senioritis. The second group, you have no problem at all stewarding well the gift of your education and opportunity. But I think instead of the one extreme, which is laziness, you could tend towards the other, which is academic idolatry. Where instead of your sense of worth and value and provision coming from God, it comes from your own accomplishments and success. And just as Babylonian culture was replacing Daniel's home, replacing his name, replacing the food that he's about to eat, are there things in our campus culture that are replacing God and his truth? For example, is your worth determined by a letter grade or a resume? Or are you defined as being a beloved child of God? Will it be your efforts in terms of getting a good job, good grades that will provide for you? Or do you trust that the Lord will be your provider? Or do the words, great opportunity, looks good on my resume, determine the choices that you make and how you spend your summer? Or do you actually go to the wonderful counselor who is Jesus? I think one way we stray from what God's words say and buy into this culture of busyness and idolatry is this one commandment. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now today, our church culture often uses this as a commandment to say, make sure you go to church once a week. But if we take an honest look at what God intended the Sabbath to be, it's actually very different. Here in Exodus 20, it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or your female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. God intended the Sabbath to be a 24-hour period of no work, of complete rest, of connecting with God and being restored. Yet I think in the back of our minds, we always say, there's no time for that. There's no time for me to be obedient to God in this way. I need to do this in order to succeed. And I think that as we're heading into finals mode, everything about the academic year gets heightened. It's a culmination of 16 weeks of work, that there just isn't enough time, that this is do or die, make or break. But in this season, when the heat is on, what do we learn from Daniel? Daniel understands a profound truth that God is the one in control. God is the one who offers us a better way of life, that God can provide. God can defy all logic of what we think leads to success, that God is able. And I want us to bring it back to us. How does this relate to our environment, where we are right now at campus? And I think there are too few examples of what it looks like to live a godly life in an environment full of anxiety. So going back to earlier this semester, Ben actually gave a talk on busyness, and he gave us space to have quiet time with God. I want to offer everyone in this room a challenge. Spend 1 hour each day in prayer and in the Word. 1 hour a day. Try that for 1 week and see, test God in this, that your life would be qualitatively better after doing that. In the same way, Daniel, he says, test it in this. I would say, test God in this. Spend an hour in prayer and in the Bible and see if your life is not better. I remember talking to one student, in the middle of midterm seasons, when it got really heavy, she shared this realization. Doesn't it make sense that we need to spend time with God all the more when we're pressed for time? And I would challenge you also, if maybe you're already able to incorporate that into your life, what could it look like to incorporate a Sabbath and keeping that holy? Allowing yourself to get true rest and not just go from thing to thing. Another example I want to share is from my friend Jared. And for some of you who went to spring conference, you saw him there. He's leading senior seminars. And so something that I learned about Jared is that he was really smart. He was a math major. In fact, he got his PhD in math. And for me, math was a subject that I loved in high school and then I hated in college. For Jared, he loved it through and through. And one day he told me that he had an open book final. And so the book that he decided to bring was the Bible. During that time when he got stuck, when he was feeling anxious, he opened the Bible, spent some time in the Word, closed it, and continued on with his test. I also remember a time when I was at UCLA, in the middle of finals, when there's so much anxiety, each one of the small groups in the dorms decided to hold what they called Midnight Cafe, a time of hospitality, snacks, worship, and prayer, a place where people with anxious hearts can be prayed for, a place of rest and community, to be centered on God. They decided to place their value on caring for people rather than studying because they were worth the time. And I bet for them, they remember much longer the people that they were able to care for and serve and the grade that they got in that final. Now, at the end of this, okay, so I'll just stop there. The last point that I made, number 3, is that they did this in the community of friends. They're able to live a godly life in the community of friends. And so going back to that, turn to the person next to you. What are some of the ways that we as a community can live counterculturally, live godly lives in the midst of an environment of busyness, stress, and anxiety? So turn back to your neighbor. What are ways that as a community we can live counterculturally, live godly lives? Anyone? Yeah.
Like being able to help other people navigate through the community and kind of focus on helping them instead of yourself.
Okay, looking to serve others, great. Yeah.
I was thinking being more, I don't know the way to phrase it, but more upfront with like our involvement in Intervarsity and like the church.
Okay, yeah. So being up front, just kind of like, hey, this is what we're all about. Yeah.
I don't know if this being totally, but you said countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing for sure, just our generation is like we always use social media with each other and each other's presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as a form of respect, like when we're all together, we shouldn't be on our phones.
Okay.
So godly for me is that you're just acknowledging someone's
Being present.
Being present, and if God's speaking to you somehow, you should be speaking to them.
Okay.
So that's something that's completely countercultural.
Great. Great. Yeah, Eduardo, last one.
Giving an example to your friends.
Okay.
Making the right decisions.
Yeah. Making the right decisions, not the popular ones. Great. And so I want to offer us some encouragement that God is ready to defy the odds, that God is able, as we choose to obey him and follow his way. And so let's just look at the rest of the passage. So Daniel decides, like, hey, let's test this for 10 days, and then we'll go from there. So in verse 15 it says, at the end of the 10 days they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men that ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were able to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men God gave them knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them and found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service, and in every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. God is able. God is able, and we see that God came through. Daniel and his friends didn't eat, they didn't drink, they didn't buy into the culture, and God blesses them abundantly. So much so that they're considered the best of the best. And while I want to leave us with the truth that God is able to do all these things, it's no guarantee that we're going to live a happy life just following him. But I want to give us one last story of the way that I trusted in God in terms of my academics. So my major was East Asian Studies with a concentration in Korean. And I absolutely loved the major and everything I learned. Do you know how many times I was asked, so what are you going to do with that? I had no idea. 2 years out of college, I was working at a bank, and then I discovered a dream job. to be the program specialist at the USC Korean Studies Institute. And this is my dream job because 1, I love the academic environment and I could work out of college. 2, this is a job that actually fit my major and what I study, which probably don't exist. And the third one, since I was working at USC, I could actually pursue a master's and a PhD tuition free. And then I looked at the requirements. Master's degree required. And I only had a bachelor's at this time, but it made me think, it's like, oh man, should I have gone for that dual degree program, getting a master's and bachelor's at the same time? But I felt like God was saying, I want you to apply for this job. And so I did. I got an interview, and I got the job. Now, that's not the crazy thing. 2 months later, after we pulled off this gigantic event, I asked my supervisor, I'm like, hey Elaine, how many people applied for that job that I wanted, the one that required a master's degree? She's like, there are 200 applicants. And I said, and what type of qualifications did they have? It's like, some had masters, some had PhDs. And so I asked her, Elaine, how did I even get this job? And I kid you not, this is what she said point blank. She said, because God wanted you to have it. Yes. You don't need to play the game in order to succeed. God has a better way. And I just want to leave you with that because you are going to be tempted to eat the food that's presented to you. You are going to be tempted to buy into the culture that this is the only way to succeed. And I just want to tell you that's the little choices that you make, the little choices to choose God's way, to be holy, to spend time in prayer, and not let yourself be defiled by the culture around you. And so I'm going to invite the worship team back up and just leave us with our 3 points that we had. That Daniel knew what God's way was, what the godly way of life was. 2, Daniel took a risk and chose into the godly life despite what the cost could be, despite how it didn't make sense. And then 3, Daniel did it in the company of friends. And I think sometimes when we're in a secular culture, when the odds are against us, we need other people in order to have the support and the accountability that we need. Let me pray for us.